Hi everyone, thank you for joining us on our live stream. I'm Johnny.
I'm Manmeet.
And just wanted to talk to you today about a couple of things, so thanks for taking the time to join us. So today there's a couple of things that we want to go over, just answer a couple of questions that we received from the community, go through a physical setup with palette and a printer, and also just share some news about Canvas that we've just released today. So there's a couple of new things that we want to chat about, and also just kind of go through a couple of questions that we've seen through our community, through emails, through Facebook, and just want to make sure that we're answering also some questions from our live stream audience. So once again, thank you for joining us. If you do have any questions, please just put it onto our YouTube chat, and we will answer those near the end of this live stream here. But to kick things off, we're just going to start with the physical setup of a palette and a printer. So Manmeet's going to walk us through that, and then we'll also just talk through the process, answer a couple of questions or common questions that we see when people go through a physical setup. And then if there's anything that you'd like to add on or want more clarification on, once again, just please add it onto the YouTube chat, and we'll be sure to try to get to it at the end of this, this webinar here. But Manmeet, did you want to take us over here?
Yeah, perfect, Donnie. Let me go over to our Ender 5, and we can start getting that set up. Good. All right, so what I've done here is I've laid out some of the parts that you would find in your Palette 3 box. So we've got our Palette 3, our USB cable, power supply, the Teflon tubes, the connector, and the stand here. So we're going to go through a setup of kind of how to get all this connected, and the first thing we'll start with is actually powering on the unit. So let me just get that undone. So here I'm just connecting it to the side. You'll see that the light is red, just indicating that it's off right now. Just clicking that on, it's now starting to boot up, and shortly the screen will power on for us to start going through that walkthrough. I'm going to skip through a tad bit and get it mounted to the stand so we have maybe a little bit of a better view for this. Back slightly. All right, so this has been factory reset. It's the firmware has been updated on this unit, just so we're not kind of waiting for that few-minute process. But otherwise, it's starting from a factory reset state, and once it boots up, we'll start walking through the steps of how you would set this up with a Bowden style printer. I know a lot of the videos we've done in the past have been more focused towards direct drive printers, so here we'll kind of give you a better explanation of what it looks like on a Bowden style printer.
So Manmeet, did we want to touch upon the differences in firmware updating?
Yeah, so with firmware updating, you have the option of either doing that through a Wi-Fi connection. With the Palette 3 Plus, you can also do that through your Ethernet. And then as a offline version, you can also use a USB key to actually get that started. So
yeah, so yeah, really convenient compared to, I guess, P2, where we had to plug it into the computer, you had to update the firmware that way. With P3, because of that Wi-Fi or Ethernet internet connection, you can automatically update it directly from Palette, which is a much more convenient experience there.
Exactly, exactly. So we're going to start off with just clicking through the touchscreen here. We've got our privacy and terms of service. Make sure you take a look at that, and I'll just skip through that for now. First thing we're going to be doing is connecting to our Wi-Fi. So I'm just going to click through the Wi-Fi. And secretly enter this password for a quick second. This is a very long password. Almost. All right, so I've entered it, I've hit connect. We can see that it's cycling to attempt to connect to that Wi-Fi connection. And once it's completed, it'll send me towards the next page. All right, so the palette is up to date. We're good to go on this side. And I'm gonna start setting up with a Canvas account. So with this, it will allow me to connect the Palette 3 device directly to my Canvas account. So I can then associate it with a particular setup that I have. So let's say it's my Ender 3 here, or my Ender 5 here, or a Prusa printer. Once I've connected it, I can assign it to a particular printer and start using it with that printer. So I will select yes. And it should provide me with a key that I'll be able to enter on the Canvas side of things. All right, I realize I may have entered our key incorrectly. Sorry, just give me one quick sec. Let me just do a quick restart here, and we will re-enter that password.
That's all right. So before we even get things set up for a print, one of the things that we want to encourage users to do is to do splice tuning. So once you actually have your unit up and running, we just want to make sure that you're going to splice tune the filament that you're using to make sure that you're getting really consistent splices. So what we want to do here is use a splice tuning feature, run a splice with those 2 pieces of filament, and then once that's all done, we want to examine that splice and just see what kind of adjustments need to be made. So if you have a thicker splice, so something that's more than 0.1 mm, so 1.85 millimeters thick of a splice, we want to make sure that we're going to get that as consistent as possible, closer to 1.75. So in order to do that, we want to apply a bit more heat and also try and reduce the compression a bit there as well. The thing about compression is that we don't want to go to extremes with that value. So we find that usually around -1 to 2 is a good range for compression, whereas with heat and cooling, we can go a little bit further. So the opposite is true for necking splices. If you have a thin splice, best thing to do is to try and increase your compression slightly, and also try and reduce the heat and increase your cooling. It just allows that filament time to solidify, because sometimes with necking, it could just be that it's molten while it's going through that filament path, and that's what's actually causing that filament to neck a bit. So just a couple of things to make sure that you're doing there. And then also, once you're done with splice tuning, just make sure that you're updating on Canvas so that when you are running a print, those values are being applied to that project, or to P3P, which we'll kind of get into a little bit later on, which is just a plugin that's used for Prusa Slicer if you would like a different option from Canvas. But yeah, how's everything going over there, Mamie?
Just one quick sec.
Another thing as well is with splice tuning, we have another option that will be coming up in a later firmware, where we'll be able to actually select the different drives where you can splice tune the filaments. And that way you don't have to unload just the first 2 drives. You can actually select the other drives on P3 or P3 Pro and create a splice tuning test on there as well. But we're just going to go into some of these questions that we're seeing on the live stream right now. So, is P3 able to be mounted upside down without affecting the performance? Yes, yes it is. So all you would have to go to, or have to do is go to the settings, choose to flip the screen, and then from there you're good to go. It won't affect the performance at all. It allows for more different setups if you have a tight space or if you want to mount it above the printer. There's a lot of options that we've seen from our users. If you go to our Facebook group, mm3.co/FB, you'll see a lot of users share their setups, and there's a wider array of different setups that people are using depending on what their printers look like, where their extruder is located, where they like to set up their filaments. So a lot of different possibilities there. And then, so I plan to, so we were going to go into Klipper a little bit later on. I know there's a couple of questions here about Klipper integration. It is something that's on our radar. We're definitely aware of it, and we know that users are looking for that compatibility. But at this time, there's no definitive timeline for when we're going to have Klipper compatibility, but it is something that's on our radar and something that we understand our users are looking for. what else do we have here? Oh, and one thing to clarify as well is that Klipper does work in accessory mode. So this is just strictly speaking on connected mode. So Klipper printers, like the Veron, they do work with palette if you are running in accessory mode. In terms of connecting it directly to the Klipper firmware, that's something, that's what I was trying to speak on. And that's something that is on our radar and will be available in the future, or we're working on having it available in the future. Concerning the P3 Pro, so the setup process for the P3 Pro and the P3 are going to be very similar. Actually, it's going to be the same. It's just that the P3 has more inputs, so you can go up to 8 colors. With the P3, we have the 4 colors. So the setup's going to be exactly the same here.
All right, Johnny, I think we are good to connect. My fat fingers have entered it in properly this time.
No worries, bud.
If you can head over to Canvas Connect, so the canvas3d.io-connect, and then we can enter this code in and connect up to it.
Sure thing. What's the code?
So it's NUWS.
NUWS?
Yes. Perfect.
Perfect.
All right, so we are going to set up with the printer today. And right now it's indicating that I'm not connected to the printer, which makes sense. I haven't done any USB connection so far. So in the case of the Ender 5, I'm going to be using this cable here. There are a few cables that come with the palette, and just kind of figuring out which one works with your particular model. So I'm just going to be plugging it in on this side. Loop it around the back here and get it connected to either one of the USB ports will be fine. And we can see now that the screen has automatically changed and taken me over to the next screen, letting me know that a connection has been made. Now it's just up to me to choose which printer it actually is. So here we do have some presets already created based on what we've seen with our community and the common printers that kind of pop up on our Facebook group and user groups. So here I have a Creality model. I'm going to be selecting next. In this case, it is the Ender 5 Pro. So there is already a preset made in that. And what that preset allows me to do is skip a lot of those steps of manually having to measure out the tube length and that sort of thing to determine things like my loading offset. So here it's already pre-calculated and I'm able to choose that and move forward. One thing it's asking me here is, have I modified my actual extruder? And what this is important for is the actual tube length. So if we take a quick look here, let's say I had modified my, my extruder to maybe be a direct drive on this. That would change the actual length from my actual end of my Bowden all the way to my actual tip of my nozzle. And that distance is what we term as loading offset. That loading offset is really important to allowing palette to calculate how much filament needs to be made and when it needs to be made to make sure the right color appears at the nozzle at the right time. So in this case, we haven't done any sort of modifications to it that would affect that measurement. So we're going to choose no here. And the next step is attaching my tube clip. So the tube clip here, in the case of a Bowden system, you're not going to be connecting this tube to your actual hot end area. You're actually going to be connecting this to your extruder. So directly at the input of your Bowden extruder. So here, I've already applied the Velcro and I'm just going to click that into place. All right, so it's securely in place now, and we can start moving over to the next steps. So I've already mounted my palette in kind of my preferred method. I put it on the kickstand in this case, so I'll just skip through that. And now it's asking me about the outgoing tube. So the outgoing tube is the tube that connects from your the outgoing of the actual palette all the way to your Bowden extruder motor. So in this case, we have a few different lengths of the Bowden tubes. And what you really want to focus on is choosing the shortest length of Bowden tube of outgoing tube that you can. The shorter that tube is, the better your calibration will be. So in this case, there is a long tube, a small tube, and a medium tube. In this case, I'm going to be using the smallest tube, as it will be able to comfortably attach between pallet and the actual Bowden connection. So I've taken this out, and I'll head over to the next step. In this case, I'm using the 57 centimeter tube. So I'll head forward there. And so it's now asking me to not actually connect the outgoing tube to the extruder until later on in the process. So I'm just going to follow that. And the reason for that is, as pallet begins to make filament, if it's already connected to your extruder motor, it might hit the actual gears, causing it to start pushing back on the filament and causing issues in the pallet path. So we're going to avoid that, and we're going to move forward here. I've selected the smallest tube, 57, and I'm going to connect up the actual tube to the actual collet as well here. So it's not just about kind of connecting it like this. So it is tight here, but you can see that gap there, which you do not want. You want this fully on top of that collet. So I'm going to make sure that I push it through, and now it's seated correctly there. The outgoing of the tube, I'm not going to connect just yet, but it would essentially be connecting to my Teflon clip here. So we'll leave that hanging for a minute. And here now, one of the really great things about the Palette 3 workflow is we've modified it so that you no longer need to go onto Canvas to download the file, prep that, and have it ready for downloading and then putting onto your actual palette unit. We're able to do that all locally on the unit for our preset printers. In the case of a custom printer, you will still need to go through those steps, but with the presets, which we're continually expanding, you can do that directly from the device. So in this case, I'm going to start that print, and we can see that it's starting to download. It's prepping everything on the palette side, and it's now asking me to begin feeding filament into the system. So Johnny, if you can just touch on filament placement. I know we've had some issues with that in terms of the ideal way to really set it up, and I wouldn't say that this is the best. Definitely done for our camera instead of the best printer setup, but what would be an ideal sort of way to configure your filaments?
Sure, yeah, we explained this in the quick start guide or the getting started guide that's included with your Palette 3 or Palette 3 Pro, but we just want to make sure that sitting in front of your palette that the spools are directed in such a way that they come off the spool very easily, they don't get tangled very easily. So usually we say, right in front, about 30 centimeters I think it is, in front of the printer, and in such a way so that the filament can roll off of the spool very easily when it's pulled very lightly. So that's usually what we're looking for.
Perfect. And here we also have kind of a quick notice that the printer is now preheating, making sure that it's getting up to the right temperatures needed to print. So it's just giving me a notice, and if we come over here, we can see that the hot end is starting to heat up, the bed is starting to heat up, and again, what's great about this compared to the Palette 2 workflow is that it's done this automatically. It's not relying on me to go to Octoprint or whatever other service to manually kind of change that temperature. We just head back here, I'll hit OK, and it's starting to create those splices to fill up my buffer and fill up the tube so that I can start feeding it into the printer. This might be a minute, so we'll just kind of wait on that. But as it's making that filament, we can see that it's splicing that filament together and starting to feed it through in preparation for that print. And now we've had the tip of the filament come out of the tube, and this is what I'm going to handle to actually poke into my extruder gear to make sure it feeds correctly. So if we see here on the screen, it's stating that not to feed that filament all the way through your extruder, but just to have the gears start to grab onto that. And the reason for that is you don't want to modify how much filament has already been fed into the system, or it will throw off how much more filament it will continue to push through, and it will start to throw off the calculation of when the next color should appear. So that's really important. You don't want to pull this out way too much when you're trying to get it engaged with the gears. Keeping it at a similar length to this is kind of what you're aiming for. So here I'm just going to move in to connect it up. So I can see that there's actually a little bit of filament already there. I'm just going to quickly pull that out from the previous print. I'll just slot that back into place. And then call it back in. All right, so I'm going to try to... Oops. So as I'm feeding it through, I want it to get into those gears. So here, it's now engaged with the gears. I'm clipping this tube in. This tube is now securely in place. It's in the teeth of the gears, and it's ready to be moved into position. So I'm now going to hit next, confirm this. The Teflon, the tube clip is already connected. When you're working with a direct drive, you may disconnect that to kind of get it into place. And now it's asking me to smart load this. So what that smart load allows me to do is, instead of going to my printer interface here and manually jogging the extruder, the smart load is allowing me to just press it once and allow it to feed automatically, essentially sending that extrude command automatically to the actual printer itself. So I'm just going to hit smart load. And so there, if we take a quick look, there is a little bit of an issue. So it is essentially skipping here because I haven't fed the filament that perfectly into the kind of the path of the next hole there. So that's not a problem. If we take a look back at this, it's kind of stated that, you know, there is no filament movement detected. Okay, no problem. It's going to allow me to try that again. So I'm just going to head over here and make sure that it's kind of angled to the place. So kind of hard. All right, so let me just kind of even out that tip, get it into place. All right, that tip really doesn't like me, so I'm just gonna quickly break that off. All right, so it feels like it's now securely in the actual input of that Bowden tube. And I'm gonna try again now to smart load from the screen here. So here now, if we take a quick look at the actual feed, there is no skipping occurring. It's smoothly moving into that tube. And then if we come back to the screen, we can also see that the value is decreasing as it's starting to load that filament into place. So with the Bowden setup here, the tube length is decently long, so it might take about 20 seconds to fully load that into place, and then we can start the print off. We'll just take a quick minute there and kind of wait on that to continue creating filament. And the other great thing about the interface on the pallet's screen is you can also send commands where, again, instead of interfacing with the actual screen, you can go through printer commands with movements and heating and all that sort of thing, which allows you to, oh, yeah, sorry. All right, so hopefully my audio is still good, but yeah, as it's starting to feed that filament through, it will continue moving through that Teflon tube here and feeding into the actual thing. So I guess one other area to touch on while this is happening is, let's say your printer was not a preset and you did need to measure your actual loading offset. Where does your loading offset start and where does it end? So we can see that the outgoing tube here comes all the way to your actual input of your extruder motor here. So with this Bowden setup, we would actually want to measure from the entrance of this area here all the way to your actual Teflon tube. So this entire blue Teflon tube, we would also want to include that in the amount of space. And then all the way to your tip. So generally what I like to do is I like to home the actual bed so that it's right against the nozzle, and then essentially measure the distance all the way up to the top of this. I'll disconnect my actual Teflon tube, hold it up, and have a ruler here to kind of measure out how long is that tube, and then I'll also add it on to the distance from here to here. And that will give me a pretty good value to start off with my loading offset. And that's essentially the extent that you need to measure out that loading offset. And another area that is going to help you be successful in your first Palette 3 print is your actual extruder calibration. So again, if you're commanding your printer to print 100 millimeters of material and it's actually only printing 85 millimeters, that is going to throw off Palette, as even though we are doing checks to make sure what we're asking the printer to print is similar to what's actually being printed, starting off with having those values as close to possible to reality is going to help Palette really hone in on those initial prints and make sure that it's in sync with your actual printer's performance. So here it's just finishing off now on the last couple millimeters, and then we can start off the print. So as it counts down, so you might see a little bit of filament starting to come out of your nozzle at this point, and that's good. Like, you don't want an excessive amount coming out. That would mean you've actually calculated your loading offset as being too large, and you're actually feeding too much filament into your head. So here we are now good to move to the next step. And it's asking me to remove any of that purged material off of my nozzle, giving me a quick second to kind of get that removed. So I've just removed a very small amount, which is quite fine. And now I can start printing. So here now the print has kicked off. It's going to take a few seconds for everything to kind of sync up in terms of the printer actually homing and getting ready to execute the print. But once it does, that print, which is our standard calibration print, so our Keychain Print, which is a 2-color print, will print out. And we do have a support article indicating what you should be looking for in that print to see if you successfully have calibrated or if something is maybe incorrect. And what you're looking for there isn't just print completion, but you're actually looking to see if your loading offset has calculated correctly and if it is actually accurate to your machine. So we do have an article in depth kind of explaining what you're looking for in that sense. And we'll touch on it when we sit down as well. So here, the print has now started. It's laying down its first layer. And it is looking good on that first layer. So we'll let that go and we'll check in a bit later. But for now, let's go head back over to Johnny and start addressing some of the other questions.
Perfect, thank you, Mammy. So yeah, a couple of things that I'm sure you've noticed. If somebody is coming from a P2 and starting to use a P3, there's a couple of improvements that we've had in that whole process. So one of the things, of course, is the loading offset. So before we had to purge clear filament through the nozzle, then actually measure the filament and stop extruding the moment that you see any color change. So that's all done. We don't need to do that anymore. That's all done with the measurement of how Mammy explained it, from where the tube connects to your extruder all the way to the tip of your nozzle. Another thing with a smart load. So smart load, if you have a preset profile like with that Ender 5, you can do smart load right off the bat. You don't have to run a calibration print. It'll have that value for you right away. So that's a nice improvement as well for people. who have more the more common printers that we see, but that is something that we're going to try and improve on and add more preset profiles in the future. One thing that I guess we can also talk about in terms of calibration is pinging and ponging. So one of the things that a lot of people like to ask about is they just want to get a better understanding of what a ping is, what a pong is, and the best way, or at least the way I like to explain it to people with a ping, is that it's comparing the amount of filament that's coming out of pallet. So with that encoder wheel, you'll see by the outgoing drive there, you're going to see that's actually measuring the amount of filament that's exiting pallet. So we're going to compare the amount of filament that's passing through that and compare it to what we expect to have at that point in the G code. So how much filament is supposed to be used up to that point. And that comparison is essentially a ping. So let's say you're getting a 95% ping, it basically means that you're using 5% less filament than we expected at that point. And then with ponging though, it's slightly different. So ponging is more the measurement of how much filament is coming into pallet and comparing that to how much is leaving via the encoder as well. So with the pongs, you're not going to see too much variation there. It's usually going to be around 100%. It's not going to really fluctuate too much. With pings though, the most important thing here is consistency. Yeah. So even if you're, let's say 5% less, and you're at 95% pings, it's more important to be consistent there and have consistent pings around 95, around 1% of 95%. And then from there is the best chance of actually finding success with your prints and keeping them in calibration. Anything that you want to add there, Mamie, about pinging and ponging?
In some cases, your first pings might be a bit lower than what you'll see later on in the print if your nozzle, for instance, is too close to your bed. Right. In that case, it might be better to actually restart the print and start at a bit more of a Z offset on your first layer so that you're not squishing in too much and causing that kind of restriction of flow. Sure. And then with ponging, yeah, I think that's kind of a great way to kind of phrase it as well. And it's more the act of homing your buffer loop. And with P3, we not only have basically a switch now at the maximum point, but we also now have one at the minimum point, which allows us to really control that to a better extent as well. Right, right. And one of the things I actually forgot to mention this as well is for users who are just starting to add pallet to their setup, we just want to make sure that your extruder is calibrated properly. So I think Mamie touched on this a bit earlier as well, but if it's off by a little bit, it's just going to exponentially get worse with each color transition. So we just want to make sure that if your printer is extruding 100 millimeters, it's actually extruding 100 millimeters. Best way to do that is to run an extruder calibration before you even add pallet to this ecosystem. So that's one of the big tips that I'd like to share. I'm also not sure if you want to share this with the loading offset as well. And kind of one of the areas with this is when we talked about the actual print that's completing during the calibration print. It's not just about seeing, does this print finish, are the colors roughly in the correct spot, but it's about looking at your actual loading offset. So we have an article on our website that we'll link down below to kind of indicate where you should be seeing that color change occur. So in this case, it is fairly fine. What we're doing here is we're actually including the outer skirt in the amount of transition of blue. So this transition of blue is looking good, and that's what you should be kind of going for.
It's around the 30–40% mark.
Exactly, whereas in something like this, it's actually overloaded. So I believe this is overloaded, where the user may have put in too much filament or had the incorrect loading offset to start with. So in that case, the colors may have looked correct in the print, but when you go for more ambitious prints like this kind of scenic model here, you're going to have problems later on in the print, and it's better to really tune that in on the first kind of thing and make sure everything is solid before going for those larger prints.
Perfect. All right. So I think those are the most common sorts of questions that we're receiving from customers or new users that are trying to set up their pallet. We received a couple of other questions as well here, so we can dive into those. And these are just based from feedback from our community, questions that we gathered through Facebook, through emails, just a bunch of areas here. So one of the first ones here, people are asking, what bugs are you working on fixing currently? So right now we actually have a page on our support page. It's mm3.co/P3 bug tracker, and on there we're trying to update that and keep up to date with issues or bugs that we've seen. what fixes we have for them, recommendations on how to address them as well, or what sorts of information that you can actually send to the support team for us to better diagnose these issues. We're also going to update those with future plans on releases on firmware to address any other bugs or any features that we want to release.
Yeah, so I think some of the ones that we initially have addressed are screen improvements. So one big issue was responsiveness,
right.
and you know, was it something with the hardware where, you know, maybe we didn't use the best screen, or was it something on the software side? And what we found was a much larger improvement by just kind of focusing on the software flow of how we kind of approach screen touches and all that, and we've seen a really large improvement on that side. And then another issue was cold splices that would occasionally occur for longer prints that customers would take on. So obviously not something we want to see. We did extensive testing on our side previous to actually rolling out the initial firmware, but this is something that came up and we wanted to make sure we weren't kind of just saying, you know, it's out of our control. So we took a lot of time to really focus on that, and we did find a good fix to really address that. But ongoing, we're continuing to listen to the community. If you have feedback, if you're running into issues, please let us know. And I know one of the issues currently is Prusa communication kind of level things. We have kind of put out a firmware to help address that as more of a temporary fix. And we're looking to kind of expand that out to more of a permanent fix for customers, so they're able to use the latest firmware and all that. But it's kind of a balance point where we want to get things out to our customers as fast as possible because we don't want them, you know, using up Filament, using up their time, but kind of having that initial build out gives us time to also finalize things on our end and kind of get it out to them as well.
For sure, and I think that segues a bit to our next question, which is what releases on the firmware are coming, or what sort of features are going to be coming in a future release. So we've mentioned this on Facebook or through a couple of our customer channels, but backup drives, multi-spool mode, those are kind of the big ones that we're going to be focusing on. More of a solid fix for that Prusa firmware like we were talking about. And then as I mentioned earlier about splice tuning, the ability just to use different channels there as well. That was a request that was made by our community and something that we've heard and something that we're going to be implementing or plan to implement in a future update. So once again, just to reiterate what Mami is saying, it's just really important to get that feedback from our community, and we are listening, and we definitely want to address any concerns that people have, and that includes things like webcam compatibility or the ability to transfer locally from P3P directly onto Canvas. So those are it's just some additional features that we're also going to be looking into. Sorry, directly onto Palette, sorry.
Yeah, and in terms of the webcam streaming, that is something we are quite close on releasing. So there has been a lot of work on that side. So it is getting quite close to release, and we're hoping to kind of push it out quite soon.
Perfect. All right, so what is next here? Oh, will P3 be able to natively integrate with Klipper? I touched on that briefly, but I think you probably have a bit more in-depth explanation there, Mamie.
Yeah, so I mean, Klipper does work with Palette 3 in accessory mode. There are limitations with accessory mode and kind of how you can use it in that way. But the majority of our customers with our previous generation products have been Marlin based. So a lot of our tuning and kind of focus has been on the Marlin community. And we are seeing a lot in the Klipper community where we really like what they're doing with their firmware. We have team members here building boron printers, wrap rigs, and you know, I want to get a Trident printer soon. And so if I can push the software team to kind of get that out sooner rather than later, it's definitely something we want to do. It's just we don't really have a defined timeline right now for when we can actually implement that.
Yeah, makes sense. And then kind of in the same vein here, instead of just Klipper, I know that we have a couple of users I guess a number of users who are using Duet boards as well. So a couple of questions here as well with the use of P3 with a Duet controlled printer. What are our thoughts there?
Yeah, so with Duet printers, you have your DWC, your Duet web control kind of interface that overlays and allows you to really control everything. And you again have two options. If you want to stick with the Duet web control, you can again run it through an accessory mode print and treat it as if it's any typical print that you're running. But if you do want that connected mode, the benefits of connected mode, you would need to essentially not use the Duet web control and just run everything directly through our Canvas interface.
Sure.
But it is compatible. When you connect up your Palette 3 to the Duet, a Duet 3 mainboard, for instance, it will recognize that it's been connected, and it will allow you to kind of have that control through the Palette 3 screen and to allow you to run prints in connected mode as well. Just you can't use the Duet web control in that situation.
For sure, and just to clarify for anyone who may be new to Palette, the differences between accessory and connected mode. So connected mode essentially means that your printer, Palette, and I guess you can use your Canvas account there as well, just to connect everything together. And the main benefit there is something called digital pinging, which means that it's checking the calibration of your print constantly. So it's checking it all the time here. In accessory mode, there is no digital pinging. It's more of a periodic check. So what you'll notice is that during an accessory mode print, you'll see your printer actually go over the transition tower. It's going to pause a couple of seconds, extrude a bit, and pause again. And what that is a ping signature. And when Palette senses that ping signature, it'll check the calibration, it'll check the pings, and that's when you're actually going to get a ping amount. So that's the main sort of advantages. With connected mode, of course, with Canvas controlling, you can monitor your prints, you can control your printer. There's also those benefits as well. But the main differences for printing purposes are those constant sort of calibration ping checks. But moving forward, so we have a question about how P3 was designed, and also a question as to the volume of Palette 3. So Mamie, how would we want to address that there?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the volume, we were constrained in a few ways in terms of we needed to integrate quite a few fans into the system to really increase the reliability of splices, making sure we're not overheating certain parts of the system. So with anybody who has designed a printer with an enclosure or had issues with a stepper motor overheating, when you are cramming all those stepper motors into a small kind of form factor, you really need that airflow. So the fans we chose have a certain CFM associated with them that unfortunately are louder than most fans because we need that increased CFM. And the other aspect of it is the actual cam mechanism that we've designed here. So it does require a lot of force to really have that precise movement and repeatable filament kind of movement that's required for reliability with Palette 3. So it is something that did have to have that increased force, and is one of the reasons why it's a bit on the louder side. I would say overall, having a silent kind of machine wasn't our top priority. It was more, can we have a reliable machine that our customers can rely on? And that's kind of the direction we've gone. If someone wants to take on the challenge of integrating a Noctua fan and special stepper drivers in, go for it. We'd love to kind of share that on the group, but please keep note that there was a reason we chose these fans and all that. So.
Sure, and just with the way that we designed P3, so I think when we initially wanted to, or kind of start this journey with P3, we sent a survey out to our P2 users and asked them, what would you like in a P3? And I think one of the biggest things was just more inputs, and 8 was the number that we found was most common with people, which is the reason why we have Palette 3 Pro now, which can go up to 8 different colors. One of the biggest differences between P2 and P3 in terms of the development as well is that we had to create this product during these times, these COVID times. So with P2, we were able to have people, in our manufacturing plant actually look through the QC process, make changes really on the fly there. With the current COVID situation, we were a bit handcuffed in that we were unable to have anyone on our team actually with our manufacturer. So any changes that needed to be made, we had to do remotely, and then we also had to account for that time difference, right? So there were a couple of things that that restricted us from what we used to do or what we were familiar with when it came to P2, but we were able to get through that and still create this product here. We also were able to do more endurance testing here than with P2. Anyone that works at Mosaic walked into the office and had mountains of filament that we had to walk through over a little bit. And one of the, I guess, benefits of COVID during that time is that our office was pretty bare because there weren't too many people in there. We were able to convert a lot of these rooms to testing areas. So we just had units running all the time, and we just had mountains of filament coming out. So the positive thing there was that we were able to endurance test a lot of splices. I can't remember what the number was, but that's like 6 digits. It's up there, right?
Yeah.
So
definitely have a lot of photos of laying in piles of filaments. And not all of that was also sent to the trash. We have a local company that makes or remakes filaments, so we were able to donate quite a bit of that to kind of have it recycled.
Perfect.
But let's maybe jump over to one of the other pieces, which is what is happening with Canvas.
Sure.
So, what is our next step forward with Canvas? Where is it? Where has it been? Where are we going next? And just kind of touching on that, if we look back, Canvas has been out for 3 years now. And prior to Canvas, it was quite a tricky kind of equation of setting up S3D and all this with your modified kind of profiles and all that to have multicolor printing accessible to a lot of our customers. So with Canvas, we really wanted to streamline that workflow of what multi-material printing was going to be like. Could we bring it to a similar workflow to what single material printing was going to be like?
Sure.
And, with that journey, we've been able to really push forward things with features such as painting. You no longer need that heavy design skill to take a model from Thingiverse and modify it to be a multi-body model in Mesh Mixer or something.
Right.
Definitely one of our big hits on YouTube. But with painting, it really takes that out of the equation, allows you to do it directly onto the model, which is really great. And then we've also been able to integrate things like stamping, where taking a image and directly stamping it onto your actual print has really unlocked even more kind of creativity on our customer side. And then just, little nice to haves with our setting histograms where, if you're not sure what should your retraction be for this printer, or what should this value be, you have kind of a notice around that particular setting, which is saying, we're noticing that the majority of customers are actually using this, maybe that should be your starting point. So that has really just helped customers get to printing over, tuning and that sort of thing. So it really has pushed things forward in the direction that we want it to go, and even making that web enabled has allowed us to push forward on things like sharing projects. Instead of downloading your STLs, your settings, screenshots and everything, just share it.
Right.
And it's really streamlined things for even our customer experience group and making sure that we're able to help customers in an efficient way. And then being able to access slicing anywhere on your smartphone. It is nice just being like, I want to print this, and I've seen this on Facebook, let me download it as well. And then now we've kind of moved into the area of monitoring your prints remotely with the integration of a Wi-Fi module in Palette 3 and all that. So it's really being that one-stop kind of software where everything can be done in one spot, as opposed to 5 other different areas that you have to kind of travel through. So with Canvas, at the heart of it, we had KISSlicer as our slicer engine. And KISSlicer was very beneficial in terms of what they had done with multi-material and multicolor printing. But, and that allowed us to really develop the painting and stamping tools that we have today. But we are aware that other slicing engines have really pushed forward as well, and kind of brought a lot of those features into their software flows as well. And we're really glad that's happened, and that slicer, namely, I would say is Slick 3R, or however the people like saying it, and that was obviously originally developed by Alessandro. I'm going to be terrible with names, but Ranalducci, and that's really been carried forward by the community including open source kind of contributors. Prusa Research has pushed that really forward as well, and they put a lot of work into making that a more refined piece of software. So with that, we're really happy to announce to our user base that Canvas can not only now be used with KISSlicer, but you have the option of using it with Slicer as your slicing engine. And what that really means for customers is now you have that freedom to choose between what we've kind of developed with KISSlicer, but also what we're going to be developing in the future with now Slicer being the slicing engine in the background, and really utilizing those workflows and all that. So the goal with Canvas has always been to really create a software platform as opposed to just, you know, a slicer commodity where, you know, are using this slicer, are using that slicer. So offering multiple options for the engines was really the next step for us to really give more freedom to our customers and really allow them to print the things they want to print. So we are really going to continue pushing forward on the slicing side, but we are also going to be a lot more focused on rethinking, you know, what the 3D printing software is capable of, and kind of how much further we can push in that direction, not just in terms of slicing dynamics, but more so in other areas that could be beneficial. So with the integration of the slicer option, you're going to be able to use things like ironing. There will be faster slicing as well. The tool pathing will be more similar to Slicer, and it will, however, take out support for stamping.
Right.
So that's something we would need to reintroduce for users that want to use the Slicer slicing engine. But one thing to note is we definitely wanted to get this out to customers as quickly as possible. We've done a lot of internal testing, but it is something we wanted to introduce to customers. It is still in the experimental phase, and we're going to continue working on it to make sure it's nice and stable, but we wanted to get it to our customers sooner rather than later. So you will have access to that as soon as today. I think this morning we went live on it, and you can also start using that. So
yep. So you can actually see right here. So I'll just share my screen slightly. But all this information that Manmeet shared with us is also included in the blog post. So that should be linked somewhere in the description. We'll have that available to you as well. But right now it's really simple to switch. So all you have to do is open your project. You go to your settings here, your project settings, and right here in the top right corner here, you'll be able to select which slicing engine you'd actually like to use for this project. So between KISSlicer, Slicer right here, and that's it. All you have to do is save, and then from there, if this was a previous project, just make sure that you reslice it, and it'll use that as a slicing engine. For people who like to use the Prusa Slicer interface, we also have P3P, which was developed by Tom Vandenede, one of our Facebook moderators, and we've worked really closely with him to just produce this plugin for Prusa Slicer users. And it's a nice little local option if somebody wants to use it offline, but it just prepares these print files through Prusa Slicer for your palette and your printer. So that you can check it out at mm3d.co/P2PP. So yeah, that's kind of the big news that we had for Canvas, and great that we were able to share that. And then kind of just moving on to, we only have a couple minutes left here, just kind of the general ones. About just support resources, if we want to get into that. Mm-hmm. What we can do is, if you want to take a look at our support center, really easy, mm3d.co/support. You can also go through our website. There is a way to go through the top there, and you'll be able to select support. It'll bring you all the way over there. For the various customers channels, we have Facebook. So once again, mm3d.co/Facebook. We have our forums, mm3d.co/forums. We have Instagram, we got Twitter, the handles that you would expect. So either Mosaic MFG or Mosaic Manufacturing. And you can reach us at any time. We also have email, support@mosaicmfg.com, as well as our website chat. So if you go into our website, bottom right corner, you're going to see a kind of a speech bubble there. You click on that, and then you should get a representative during business hours. So that's kind of the various ways that you can get to us. We usually respond within a business day, so feel free to send us any questions that you have. And then also just wanted to take a moment to mention the palette print contest. So usually with the palette print contest, we have people who submit pictures of their prints, and whoever gets the most likes or mentions, comments, they get a $50 prize or the option to get spools of filament. For the holidays, so over the December weeks, we've changed it slightly. So now the posts with the most likes or comments is going to get $250, and the second and third place prizes will get $50 each. So we'll be running that for the rest of December. So one way to submit pictures, just post your pictures on Facebook, on Instagram, share them on Twitter. And based on the number of likes that you're going to get through there, that's how we nominate people, and that's basically how we rank you for the first, second, and third prizes there. So nothing too crazy there, but did just want to share a bit more love here over the holiday season, and just love seeing these prints. So just encouraging people to share more, and we'd love to see what you're creating with your palette. Other than that,
I think those were the core kind of questions we wanted to go over, but let me go head over back to the Ender print, and we can take a look at what that's going to look like when it's actually completed. I think it should be pretty close, and
sure,
we can take a quick look at that. Just having a brief second with the camera, but the print is, I think, about 65% of the way done. So just waiting to kind of take a quick look at that, and we can get a good sense of where it's at. Johnny, anything on the questions from customers while we kind of switch over?
Just asking about some compatibilities, some preset profiles. So as I mentioned before, we are working on creating more preset profiles for common printers. If you have a request for a printer, definitely feel free to send us an email. And then from there, we're going to kind of pass it on to our team and see if we can create some of these details. If you do have a really great printer profile, what we would ask is to share your loading offset, share that information about your printer, and that will just allow us to make sure that we are creating really great profiles for everybody based on information from our different users. So I would encourage anybody that has found success with their printer profiles just to share that information with us, or if you'd like to see your printer as a preset, send us a quick email and we can definitely send that request through to our team as well.
Yeah, all right. So we've got the camera feed here. You can see that the print is actually still going on. I guess we don't have quite enough time to see it finished, but we can see the progress right now. There's about 30 minutes remaining. And it's basically gone through a few of the color changes on the first layer, but the next color changes will start appearing once that solid layer has appeared on the top, and then it will build up those colors. So again, what you're aiming for here is not just a complete print. That is one part that you want to factor in as well, but also analyzing the bottom of your print to really make sure your loading offset is set correctly before moving into larger prints. So just a quick shot there, we'll head back. But yeah, I think we're good here.
All right, so yeah, I think we're up for time. So I'm just going to wrap up here. We had a chance to answer some questions, some common questions that we saw from our audience, from our community. Once again, we really encourage you to continue to send us these requests, to provide us with your feedback. We love hearing from you, and just really want to make sure that the community is being heard, because you are obviously the most important people to us. So we want to make sure that we are addressing any needs. And we appreciate the patience that you've had with some of the things that we've been dealing with over the past couple of weeks, especially with the shipping delays. But with the current climate of how shipping is, we do expect those ocean freight shipments to arrive in early January. So they are currently en route. But we did just want to wrap up, say thank you again for taking the time to join us today. If you have any questions, once again, please reach out to any of those customer channels. But hopefully you have a great day. And yeah, Memi and I had a great time chatting with you. So have yourself a great day, and we'll chat later.